Hey everybody, Mr. Wildowitz here. I want to go over a policy uh, implemented by the United States government after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, a policy that is rooted in fear as well as racism. Here is Japanese American incarceration. Japanese immigration. Over 250,000 immigrants came to the United States from Japan from 1860 to 1923. This migration ground to a halt with the passage of the Immigration Act of 1924, which outlawed nearly all Japanese immigration. By 1940, over 125,000 people of Japanese origin or descent lived in the contiguous 48 states, with the highest population in states on the West Coast, and over 150,000 lived in the territory of Hawaii. The bombing of Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the American military base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, killing over 2,400 people. The United States declared war on Japan the next day, and 4 days later, Germany and Italy, who were allied with Japan, declared war on the United States. The United States was now fully enmeshed in World War II. Executive Order 9066. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. The order declared that the Secretary of War and other military commanders had the power to establish military areas within the United States and to exclude any or all persons from these areas. Military leaders then designated California, Southern Arizona, Western Oregon, and Western Washington as military areas and ordered the removal of all people of Japanese descent from these areas, regardless of whether they were American citizens. Incarceration. In the spring of 1942, over 110,000 people of Japanese origin or ancestry in the designated military areas, but not in Hawaii or other areas of the country, were forced to leave their homes and imprisoned without trial. There was no evidence that any of these individuals were disloyal or posed any threat to the United States. Over 2/3 of those imprisoned were American citizens. They were first ordered to report to so-called assembly centers on the West Coast. They were given little time to prepare and were told little about what awaited them. They were only allowed to bring what they could carry to the assembly centers and were forced to either abandon their other possessions or sell them quickly at bargain prices. After several months of imprisonment at these makeshift centers, they were transferred to one of 10 permanent incarceration camps. The camps were located in isolated parts of the interior of the country that were surrounded by fences with guard towers. The camps provided simple barracks-style living quarters and provided very basic services, including schools and hospitals. Internment of other groups. The federal government also incarcerated people of German and Italian descent, including American citizens. However, the people from these groups were not incarcerated en masse based only on their race and ethnicity, as were people of Japanese descent. Rather, individuals from these groups were incarcerated if the government suspected them of disloyalty or believed that they were a threat, however baseless these suspicions may have been. Overall, over 11,000 people of German descent and 2,700 of Italian descent were imprisoned. Some government officials advocated a larger scale internment of these groups, similar to the Japanese, but the idea was never implemented. Both groups were much larger than the population of people of Japanese descent. Over 1.2 million people living in the United States had been born in Germany, and another 5 million had two parents born in Germany. Further, over 2.4 million people had immigrated to the United States from Italy between 1900 and 1920. Unlike Japanese immigrants, immigrants from Germany and Italy could become naturalized citizens and were more socially integrated than Japanese Americans. Populations of German and Italian immigrants and their descendants were also more dispersed throughout the United States than those of Japanese descent, who were concentrated disproportionately on the West Coast. These groups also did not face the racism that the people of Japanese origin or descent experienced. Release and apology. Recognizing that incarceration without trial was potentially unlawful, the government began releasing some prisoners that it deemed loyal citizens in 1944, and then released all prisoners in January of 1945. Those released often found their homes in despair or damaged by looters, and in some cases, even found someone else occupying their homes and businesses. Many of the former prisoners were financially ruined by their incarceration and had to start over with nothing. In 1948, the federal government approved $38 million to settle claims of property lost by those who were incarcerated, a small fraction of the actual value. It was decades before the federal government formally acknowledged the injustice of incarceration. President Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which apologized for incarceration and approved $20,000 reparation payments to individual victims. Here, we will examine 5 historical documents about incarceration and answer the question, why did the United States government incarcerate Japanese Americans during World War II?